We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening. Welcome in again to a special edition of Meet Me at Musial. We're doing I'm Daniel Shoptaw, C7. You know that stuff. We're doing the divisional preview series again. We talked Milwaukee last week. We're talking those people from Chicago. We're talking about the Cubs with Evan Altman. You'll find him on Twitter at the Evan Altman. You find him writing at Cubs Insider. Evan, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I know I was a little disappointed, that I didn't get to write anything up for you, but I was really happy to have been invited on to talk about the Cubs a little bit. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And before we get into the Cubs, though, let's talk about when you got started writing, where you write, all this kind of background information.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, and it actually got started, I want to say it was either 2011 or 2012, so not a particularly good time for the Chicago Cubs. Right. They were, in fact, it was really terrible. This is like the last thing you'd want to be writing about. And it actually got started on Yahoo. They used to have a contributor network, where you could just be, some random person off the street and come in, to submit something to them and kind of pass a little to test or whatever, right? Editorial test. And then you get paid based on page views, but that shut down pretty quickly. Got together with another guy who was kind of running a little site. And he said, hey, and looking for people to write about this. And then I eventually took the site over. We kind of took it over onto its own platform, and that was my current business partner on it. We actually met. It had met over Twitter, but then met in person at Game 1 of the World Series in 2016, and then it kind of launched the site, kind of redesigned it from there. So and actually, so I it's allowed me to do a few cool things. I'm actually wearing my hat from the London series, Cubs Cardinals. And unfortunately though, originally we were going to travel out together, my business partner and myself, when it was supposed to be in 2020. But as most people are probably aware, that one did not work out so well. So 3 years later, I did get to go out and watch the game. So it's been a pretty cool little ride so far, covering the Cubs from afar.
Yeah, it definitely has been. And even though we don't like to talk about it, you did get to cover a World Series, so that's not something a lot of Cub fans could ever say. So that's a pretty important thing.
Yeah, I mean, and it was just the weirdest, looking back on it now, right? Like how, and that was the one thing. And again, I think a lot of folks probably felt this way for different reasons, but I kept repeating to myself when it happened. I really never thought. I said I never thought this would, or I think I actually said this wasn't supposed to happen. Like I didn't actually believe that it would. Like they'd figure out a way to screw it up, or fate or the gods or whatever would come down from on high and prevent it. And that's still. I feel like the years since have not been real kind. Maybe that's the penalty that we pay, right? So that it's like now, there are a lot of fan bases that have maybe a little bit more reason to be upset about when things maybe don't happen, but it is funny how that kind of changes from, it went from like just one in my lifetime to like, why haven't we won 3 in my lifetime? So we'll see.
I mean, that's what Boston did, right? They broke a curse and then won forever. So that's just the way it's supposed to go,
I guess.
So let's talk about then 2024 and the idea of the Cubs trying to, maybe get one of those other 3 titles. It was a bit of a slow off season for the Cubs, wasn't it? I mean, it picked up at the end, but what were your thoughts about what the Cubs did this winter?
Yeah, so it was really odd though, because it did end up being pretty slow there in kind of those middle, but they opened up the offseason by signing Craig Counsell, right?
Yeah,
Go
right.
get making the highest paid manager in baseball, fire David Ross out of the blue. Like nobody, there were like 5 people on the planet that knew this was happening, and it kind of came out of nowhere. and so I think the thought from there was like, oh wow, okay, they're ready to start making some splashes, right? And
Mhm.
instead it was like, okay, well, no, the Dodgers are just going to go spend $1 billion, and then okay, well that means the Cubs are going to do this and this, and they didn't, and they didn't, and they didn't. But it's been interesting to see how that's actually worked, because I was skeptical of it. I think a lot of other people were, that they would be able to kind of wait out the market and get the value. But really excited about the Shota Imanaga signing, being able to get him for probably about half of what even I think fairly conservative estimates were, and being able to get Cody Bellinger for about half in terms of maybe even less than that, if he opts out, so there's a little bit of risk there, but to be able to get him on a much lower contract in terms of value and length than they had thought. They had a pretty nice trade with the Dodgers. I mean, I don't feel like they did enough to cement anything, right?
Mhm.
I think it's, or the cement hasn't cured. They've added some nice pieces, and Bellinger isn't even really an addition, right? Like
Right.
you're just bringing him back, so that's not even adding to it. But I really think there's still some question marks. I would have loved to have seen them add more left-handed pop. I would have loved to have seen us, frontline starter with more swing and miss type stuff. Really, I felt like they were in on Tyler Glass now, and clearly that, again, the Dodgers worked their magic there. But yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, depending on who's the audience, and in this case,
Mhm.
I know who the audience is, but the NL Central's not very strong, right? There's
Yeah.
not
Right. Right.
that nobody really did much there, other than like the Reds feel like they're kind of going for it a little bit, but Milwaukee sold off. The Pirates aren't there yet. Um, so I think there's that measure of how big a swing do you need to take? And so I think the Cubs looked at this almost like you would in a two strike approach. They shortened up a little bit, saying, hey, we know we need to get better. We know we need to make something happen. But we don't need to hit a home run this winter.
Mhm.
We just need to knock a single through the hole on the right side. And so I think they did that. I think it's enough to keep them in solid contention in the division. But when it comes to having to stand and swing with somebody like Atlanta or Los Angeles, you know, I don't know that they've got the punching power for that, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like maybe the whole NL Central had that idea, right? That okay, we're all just going to be mediocre, so nobody has to do a whole lot of anything. It's kind of fascinating that nobody went out and kind of grabbed hold, because it really would have only taken maybe one big free agent signing to have really put somebody at the top of this division.
Yeah, and that's what it felt like. I know the Cardinals signed like 18 or 19 37-year-old pitchers or whatever it was. And although like I think a lot of those in a vacuum could be really good. But again, you didn't see the Brewers obviously got rid of big time.
Right.
I mean, when Corbin Burns is gone, like that's the opposite of that's moving you backwards. And I mean, the Reds signed a couple guys. You look at Jamer Candelario, and again, two-time former Cub now, who had a really strong season last year. But that's not a premier bet. He's a good. That's why the Cubs added him at the trade deadline. He's a good
Mhm.
addition to a team that's already kind of there. And you look around and you think, man, is there that deal? And I do think, though, you look at it and you look at what that free agent market was, and it was, you go Ohtani at the very top, and then a very big gap, and then Bellinger was pretty much number two, but there are a lot of flaws there, and we're looking at two of the top pitchers on the market still out there. It just, I don't know that difference making offensive force was out there for anyone. And so when that's the case, do you sit there, do you say, well, what's the better value? Do we add a guy who we think could be okay, and overpay for him, relatively speaking, or do we kind of rely, and I think this is what we're seeing a lot throughout the entire division, is that a lot of these teams have chosen, whether it's a financial thing or whether it's, obviously it's largely going to be that in almost every situation, but relatively speaking, where do they think they're going to get the most impact? and you're seeing so many of them, at least 3, and the Cubs are really up there too in that regard, leaning into their farm, right? They built that up. They got a lot of prospects coming up, and that's, I think, part of it too. Do we pay this veteran, high 8 figures, 9 figures for a good number of years to come in, and then we're kind of jamming things up a little bit as far as what we develop prospect wise. So, it'll be interesting to see. We revisit this in 3 or 4 or 5 years. Maybe it's very different because now it's an arms race in terms of, okay, who developed their guys and now who's looking to add that major piece to complete the puzzle.
One of the things that has been a big topic, but also around the Cardinals, but also a lot of other teams, is the TV money, the RSNs. Now, the Cubs have their own network with the Marquee Network. Is there any kind of issues around that, or is that a situation where the Cubs look like they're kind of set when everybody else is kind of in turmoil?
They should be set. And by all accounts, I mean, they own it. Not outright. I mean, they split it with Sinclair, which is the parent company of the Bally Sports Groups. But the problem with the Bally networks, right, is that they kind of spun those off. That's part of Diamond Sports Group. But with Marquee, it's a separate deal, and it isn't one of these where, and I mean, they do pay themselves effectively out of the broadcasting, but they fronted the money. So it's not as if they're in this deal where they're saying, hey, we're going to give you X amount for X number of years. It's more a matter of, however much they profit, be it through advertising revenue or things like that. So the Cubs are making more money than what they were, on the base broadcast rights than what they had through, several years ago before Marquee came into the picture. But it's still a far cry from what we see. I mean, the Dodgers are able to do what they're doing because they had that ludicrous, whatever it was, a $3 billion 25-year deal or something like that. They're making $200 or $300 million a year off of their broadcasting deal, which is a thing of the past. That bubble has long since burst. So, but the Cubs are in this new landscape because of the fact that they're able to offer it not only on traditional cable and satellite carriers, but they've got a standalone app that you can do on your phone or your smart TV. So people are paying $20 a month for that. And again, they're able to rake that in pretty easily because then they maintain ownership of it. They don't have to worry about somebody going bankrupt and possibly restructuring or reneging completely on the rights deal. So in the new landscape, yes, they look far better than a lot of their competitors out there.
Yeah. So we're deep into spring training now, and like you said, the big acquisition, at least the thing that kicked off the winter, was the bringing in of Craig Counsell. Have you been able to tell much difference from what you've seen or how things have been run down in Arizona, or is it still too early to tell?
I struggle with this a little bit because I don't know how much of it is, am I involved in like a confirmation bias of sorts where I kind of I loved the hire, and I was not a huge David Ross detractor. I supported some of what was going on there, but I was definitely among those who was ready for them to move on. Right. So I think in that regard, I look at it as, well, I think Craig Counsell's better, so I'm going to say what he's doing is better. But I have really liked that what he said, whether it was his opening press conference, whether it was what he said at Cubs convention or just talking to the media, when he talks about getting to know players, kind of understanding them on more of a humanity level, right, versus just a ball player level, and understanding and letting young guys come up and make mistakes and understanding that that's going to happen. We heard about that with Christopher Morel recently, who they're trying to work in at third base. And Counsell's happier with those mistakes, where I felt like David Ross was a little bit more old school in that guys didn't really get that chance to come and learn on the job. We'd see a lot of young guys come up, they'd get an at-bat, they'd sit for 2 games, they'd come in, they'd get another couple of at-bats, they'd sit for a week, and there didn't seem to be that real effort to bring them along in a manner that was conducive to their development. And Ross said as much, right? They were trying to win. And when you're trying to win, development usually takes a back seat. But I think it's possible. I mean, look at the Orioles. It is possible to do both as they brought some of those guys along. So I do like what I've heard and seen from Counsell in that regard. I mean, he's been very, very humble about things as well. I think he's done a really good job of coming into a situation where most of his staff was already dictated for him. Which is, it makes it easier if somebody's going to pay you $8 million a year. I think that makes, I could find ways to compromise on a couple things with my staff, maybe, and the rest of them all stayed in Milwaukee. But I think that's been interesting too, to see him come in to this situation where a lot of the pieces were already in place, and he's been able to kind of work within that. And it seems like all the players and the staff has embraced that as well. I don't know if that speaks more to Counsell or the idea that, a lot of them were maybe kind of the opinion that maybe things needed to change a little bit as well. But yeah, I feel like I think he brings a really good sense of balance and just of, I don't want to say like forgiveness sounds wrong, or maybe or grace is maybe
Right.
one of them, where I think those mistakes aren't going to be maybe feared as much, and they're more learning opportunities. It sounds kind of corny, but that's what I see so far.
Yeah. So every year, and especially probably in a situation like that, what you're talking about, when there's a little bit more leeway given, but every camp has a guy that comes kind of out of nowhere and at least has a great spring. It may not be a guy that's going to be, really make his way onto the team, but at least gets into that conversation. Has there been anybody like that for the Cubs this spring?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, I think we're seeing Matt Shaw, who was their number one draft pick last summer, who has come in. Infielder, probably going to have to be worked in at third base. And he played. He was a shortstop at Maryland. Played a lot of second base there. Those positions are obviously taken up for a while in Chicago, but he has looked really, really good in the early going. Michael Bush, the guy that they got in the trade from the Dodgers, is another one who they're transitioning him over to first base. He's trying to play a little second, a little third. Hadn't really worked out over there, and they've got a little bit of an uncertain spot at first base. He's really driving the ball all over the place, and I think he's one who should. I mean, that the goal was like, hey, we want you to hold down this position.
Mhm.
I think he's really going to. And then another guy who we haven't really seen much of, in terms of the actual games, so much as maybe on the backfields and that sort of thing. And while he's very much a known commodity, he looked like a reach. Their top pick from 2 years ago is Cade Horton. And I think that's a guy who, when you're looking at a team, I talked about, boy, I'd like to see them find some pitcher who throws hard, gets strikes, gets strikeouts, right? They didn't go out and sign that guy, but I think it's entirely possible that they could add him by mid-season in the form of Horton. And you're talking about a guy who's got ace type stuff who could, again, it's way too early to try to say, yeah, he's going to be the ace over, say, Justin
Mhm.
Steele, but he's got that kind of stuff. And I think he's showing it when you just watch him operate, even on those backfields with the little games where nobody else is there watching. You see the video, and he jumps out of the screen at you with his stuff. So that's a fun one that I think most other teams all other teams in NL Central are probably going to not want to hear too much about over the next several years.
Yeah, I'm already not excited about this, and I'm just now hearing about it. So that doesn't sound like something that we want the Cardinals to see. Um, so let's take a look a little bit into this season. We've talked about it, that the division is kind of lumped all together. How do you think it shakes out over 162 games?
Yeah, I'd be. I'm not even trying to pander one way or the other or rile anybody up. I do think that by bringing Bellinger in, it solidifies things. I do believe the Cubs should be the favorites now, and I think they are by a couple of projection systems now. At this point, I think they were probably in there for second. I'm concerned about the Reds, like in a bad way. Like, for some reason, they feel like the Brewers used to be that little brother that they would just, kick you in the shins and then run away and hide, and then, go tell mom that you hit him or something, and you couldn't do anything about it. And that seems to have gone away now. I think, as I look at it, I do think the biggest probably boom bust is going to be there in St. Louis. I mean, I think if that rotation holds up, we already saw Sonny Gray with a little injury there. If those guys are able to, if Lance Lynn dials back the clock
Mhm.
to the first go round with the Cards, and that dude's a hoss. I love Lance Lynn. because he's from my now my hometown, not where I grew up, but where I live.
Oh,
Lance Lynn
okay.
is from here in Brownsburg, Indiana. So we were just over, I see his name around every once in a while, so he's and he's just a fun dude to listen to, good old boy. But as we've seen from him, he can be either really good or really, really bad. And it's kind of like there's not much in between. So, again, I'm looking at it like I think I mentioned earlier the Cubs don't have a very high ceiling, but I do believe they've raised their floor enough that I think that alone is significantly better than the other four teams throughout the division. I think that's what we're kind of looking at this point, and therefore they don't need to get, as we're not talking about them having to get like 95th percentile production out of everyone to be the best team in the division, which isn't saying a lot because I think 85 wins could get you into the postseason from the Central. And, if they get 87, 88, I think they're pretty well on their way. So I'm going Cubs. And then I think that, to me, the Cardinals and Reds are right in there. I think Pittsburgh's actually going to finish ahead of Milwaukee. I just don't think Milwaukee is really aiming for much this year. So that's, I guess, how I'd shake it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does feel a little bit like it's going to be a slap fight between between all these teams. But if nothing else, I guess it will be interesting baseball because there's not going to be a safety net, right? There's nobody coming out of this division with a wild card berth. It's winner take all, and that at least may make for an interesting September.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so anyway. And because there's reason to believe, again, that being mediocre, I guess, relative to other divisions, other top teams, whatever, it really doesn't matter, right? What matters
Right.
is, can you hang within the division? And if that's making for, if we got a bunch of teams that are all stacked right around that 500 mark, which I think is entirely reasonable. Again, other than Milwaukee, I don't think I don't even think they have their typical puncher's chance, because Yelich is well past his ability to, I think, put him on his back like he was for a while there. But yeah, it should be very interesting. And I think then you get to the point of like, okay, well, does that create a buyer's market out of teams that, maybe in another season would not have been? You're right around that 500 mark. You could still be looking to move some guys and make some noise. And so that, to me, could make things very, very interesting around the trade deadline. So I think it's going to be a fun season, even if the baseball is not this sounds awful, but even if it's not like the highest quality, we're not watching like these world beating great teams, but I do think there's going to be very, very competitive, which I'll take any day of the week. Let's just give me a fun summer of competitive baseball where, multiple teams in the division actually care and are trying to win. That's the best.
The Cubs come to Busch for the last time right before the All-Star break. The Cardinals go to Wrigley for the last time the first weekend in August. I don't know what your opinion is on this balanced schedule, but whatever the case may be, it feels like they've got to do something about it because the Cardinals and Cubs not playing in September just feels wrong.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I don't mind the balance. The thing that's, well, of course, as we talked about, it's really tough on a division right now, like the Central. If the teams aren't very good, right, you don't get those extra 6 games or whatever against the teams that might have been really. Look back, I mean, heck, if you look at 2015, when you had 3 teams in the division with well over 90 wins, right? Like they're the 3 best records in baseball, and they're all coming out of the Central. Well, I don't think anybody's concerned about that this year, but the thing to me, like, okay, if on one hand the goal was everybody plays everybody, right? Everybody gets a chance at least every other year to see this team come into town. Cool. I can appreciate that. But if that's the case, if we're trying to, let everybody see every team, or kind of, again, balance it out and increase the broaden the platform, whatever we want to call it, should we not also be protective of those rivalries? Right. That's where, like, I don't think anybody could care less what happens with when's Pittsburgh's last trip to Busch or Wrigley, right? Who cares? I don't know. But why aren't they closing the season against one another? Because not only is that a tremendous rivalry, but as you just said, if we're looking at, I mean, any division, right? You want to see those teams. If it's possible that season, the them moving on, could depend on those 2 or 3 games at the very end of the season, don't you want them to be the most meaningful type of matchup that the Cubs and Cardinals are having to play one another with a possible playoff berth on the line? Like, that's far better than, what are you, it'd be like the Mariners coming to Chicago. Oh, yay. Like I don't care, even if those teams are both battling for it. So I think that's one thing that Major League Baseball sometimes can't get out of its own way when it comes to promoting its product.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is the easiest way. You guys don't even have to try very hard. But like the calendar as it is, the schedule as it is, in general, but I think they could tweak a few things pretty easily.
Yeah. And it does take away, I know, and I understand why they went to the balanced schedule. I'm one that kind of liked the other version because, September was, almost like entirely the NL Central, right? You played everybody in your right at that time. You might have a game, a series or two here and there that were off, but for the most part, it felt like a lot of you got down to September, they were playing the Cubs, the Brewers, the Pirates, just making that last stand. And now, this year the Cardinals have 10. They end the year in Colorado and San Francisco, so it has a little bit of anticlimactic tendencies there.
Yeah, that just seems odd, right? Like I don't really get it, and I do understand, right, that again, if you are cutting some of those games out, necessarily there will be some gaps. But I think
Right.
anybody would just say, well, okay, give me a full month, give me August in which I don't play any division rivals, and then load up September with those matchups, right? Or it makes something work and that's I think what you see that in the NFL, right? They figured it out because the NFL was tired of to whatever extent they could of tanking and that sort of thing. So they put those division rivalries late in the season, so teams are going to have to try to at least play for some pride, and you get the chance to play spoiler and that sort of thing. Because again, like I said, I guess, the Rockies, like, do they really care about playing spoiler? Let's say the Cardinals are up on a game or two in the division late in the season like that. Do the Rockies really care if they're 20, 30 games out?
Right.
Are they out there trying to do anything like for their own, outside of their own pride? They don't care who comes out of the Central, right? Like Chris Bryant's not carrying his allegiance to the Cubs so much. He's like, I'm going to go still beat up on the Cardinals. Like that's just, I don't know. It's kind of weird to me. And I don't see how that's actually helpful to the product of Major League Baseball if we look at it from that perspective. But, yeah, I mean, hey, if you can, maybe the Cubs can just play the A's. I'd be cool with that. If you told me they were just going to play every last place team late, I'd be fine. But maybe that's a better way to do it.
Maybe so. Well, Evan, I'm not going to say good luck to the Cubs, and I know you're not going to say good luck to the Cardinals, but I do hope that this season is enjoyable for you and gives you plenty of things to discuss throughout the year.
I appreciate it. I will say the same for you in that regard. Maybe can I say like break a hamstring or something like that? Like can we instead of break a leg, right? This is good luck for the probably not. That wouldn't
Probably
be
not. No, let's,
we don't want to do that because then it'll happen and then people are gonna get really mad at me like that. I already hear that enough.
Sensitive on that topic.
No, that's that would not be good. But no, I appreciate the time and I know it's always good to kind of talk rivalries from a friendly perspective, kind of lay some things out, and then before we got to put the gloves on and go to work here in a couple weeks.
Yep, and maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we'll get together as the season's wrapping up with these two teams in August. We'll do it again. So appreciate you joining me.
All right, thank you.